Marcus Thompson was not just any man. He was a force to be reckoned with. Born and raised in the bustling city of Chicago, Marcus grew up surrounded by challenges that could have easily broken someone else. His parents worked tirelessly. His father as a mechanic and his mother as a school cafeteria worker, to provide for their family. Though they didn't have much, they instilled in Marcus the belief that hard work and determination could open doors no one thought possible. From an early age, Marcus showed promise. He wasn't just smart. He had a hunger for knowledge that set him apart from others. While some kids spent their afternoons playing outside, Marcus would sit at the kitchen table poring over books borrowed from the local library. His favorite subject? History. Not because it was easy, but because it fascinated him how people fought against injustice throughout time. Those stories stayed with him, shaping the person he would become. When Marcus graduated high school at the top of his class, his teachers encouraged him to apply to prestigious universities. At first he hesitated. How could a boy from the south side of Chicago compete with students who came from wealthy families and private schools? But then he remembered something his mom always told him. You don't need money or connections to succeed. You only need heart. With that advice ringing in his ears, Marcus applied to several Ivy League schools and got accepted into all of them. Choosing Harvard felt surreal. It wasn't just about attending a famous university. It was about proving to himself and everyone else that where you started didn't define where you could go. College wasn't easy for Marcus. He juggled part-time jobs while keeping up with demanding coursework. There were late nights when he questioned whether he belonged there among classmates who seemed so confident and polished. Yet every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself why he was doing this. He wanted to make a difference, not for himself, but for those who couldn't speak up for themselves. After graduating magna cum laude, Marcus decided to pursue law. The courtroom fascinated him. To him, it wasn't just a place where arguments happened, it was a battlefield where truth clashed, with lies and justice hung precariously in the balance. Throughout law school, Marcus excelled, earning accolades and respect from professors and peers alike. When he passed the bar exam on his first try, he knew he was ready to take on the world. Marcus returned to Chicago, determined to use his skills to help those who needed it most. Many lawyers sought out glamorous corporate cases or high-profile clients, but not Marcus. He chose to represent individuals who had been wronged by the system, people whose voices were often ignored. Whether it was defending a single mother accused of a crime she didn't commit or suing a corrupt landlord exploiting tenants, Marcus gave each case everything he had. His reputation grew quickly, and soon people began calling him the people's lawyer. But Marcus wasn't just admired, he was also controversial. His outspoken criticism of police misconduct made him unpopular with certain groups, especially within law enforcement. Officers who prided themselves on maintaining order saw Marcus as a troublemaker, a man stirring up dissent instead of respecting authority. Some even whispered behind closed doors that he was too ambitious, too vocal, too bold. What they failed to understand was that Marcus wasn't trying to cause chaos. He was fighting for fairness. And if that meant ruffling feathers along the way, so be it. Despite the backlash, Marcus refused to back down. If anything, it fueled his passion even more. Every victory in court felt like a step toward a better future. Every defeat taught him resilience. Over time, he became a symbol of hope for many in his community. People looked up to him not just because of his brilliance, but because of his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. On the evening that would change his life forever, Marcus found himself reflecting on his journey. Earlier that day, he had won a landmark case against a police department accused of discriminatory practices. It was a monumental win, one that earned him national attention. But Marcus didn't feel triumphant. Instead, he felt weary. The fight for justice was exhausting, and sometimes it felt like no matter how many battles he won, there would always be another one waiting around the corner. As he drove home through the dimly lit streets of Chicago, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He glanced at the passenger seat where his briefcase rested, filled with papers detailing yet another upcoming case. Despite the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders, he couldn't help but smile. This was his purpose. This was what he lived for. Little did Marcus know, however, that danger lurked just ahead. Unbeknownst to him, a routine traffic stop would soon turn into a nightmare. As he slowed down at a stop sign preparing to continue his journey home, blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Confused, he hadn't done anything wrong, Marcus pulled over, unaware that this seemingly ordinary encounter would alter the course of history. What happened next would spark outrage across the nation, leaving an indelible mark on society. But before tragedy struck, Marcus was simply a man driving home after a long day, dreaming of a brighter tomorrow. A man whose brilliance, courage, and compassion inspired countless lives. A man whose story was far from over, even if his own chapter was about to end. Officer Daniel Grayson had been on the force for over a decade. To his fellow officers, he was considered reliable, someone who followed orders without question and always showed up when duty called. But to the people in the neighborhoods he patrolled, he was something else entirely. Over the years, whispers about Grayson had spread like wildfire. Some said he was quick to anger, others claimed he treated residents with suspicion, especially those who didn't look like him. Complaints against him piled up over time, accusations of rude behavior during traffic stops, unnecessary searches, and even racial slurs muttered under his breath. Yet none of these complaints ever seemed to stick. Each time, internal investigations cleared him, leaving the community feeling frustrated and powerless. That evening, as Grayson drove through the quiet streets of Chicago, his mind wandered. He thought about his career, which hadn't turned out quite the way he'd imagined. Once he'd dreamed of being a hero, someone who protected the innocent and made the city safer. But somewhere along the line, things changed. The job became less about serving the public and more about maintaining control. Perhaps it was the long hours, the pressure from superiors, or the constant tension between police and the communities they were supposed to protect. Whatever the reason, Grayson had grown cynical. He saw threats everywhere, even where none existed. It was then that he noticed a car approaching an intersection ahead. The vehicle slowed down at the stop sign before continuing forward. Something about the car caught Grayson's attention. It wasn't speeding, weaving erratically, or breaking any laws, but something felt off to him. Maybe it was the sleek design of the luxury sedan, or the fact that it stood out among the older cars typically seen in this part of town. Without hesitation, Grayson activated his lights and signaled for the driver to pull over. Marcus Thompson was stunned when he saw the flashing blue lights behind him. He glanced at the rearview mirror, his brow furrowing in confusion. What could this be about? He had come to a complete stop at the sign, used his turn signal, and driven well within the speed limit. There was no logical explanation for why he was being pulled over. Still, he complied immediately, pulling his car to the side of the road and shifting into park. As he waited, Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. These situations could escalate quickly if handled poorly, and he knew better than most how tense interactions with law enforcement could become. Grayson stepped out of his patrol car, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his holstered firearm. His approach was deliberate, his boots crunching against the gravel as he walked toward Marcus's vehicle. When he reached the driver's side window, he peered inside, his eyes scanning the interior. The sight of Marcus, a sharply dressed black man sitting behind the wheel of an expensive car, only heightened his unease. In Grayson's mind, this image didn't fit the narrative of what someone in this neighborhood should look like. Without introducing himself or explaining the reason for the stop, Grayson barked, "License and registration." Marcus nodded politely, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He reached into his pocket for his wallet, careful not to make any sudden gestures. Then, with steady hands, he retrieved his license and handed it over along with the vehicle's registration papers. All the while, he maintained eye contact, hoping to project calmness and cooperation. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked, his tone measured and respectful. "I believe I followed all the rules." For a moment, Grayson hesitated. There was nothing visibly wrong with Marcus's documents, nor had he observed any illegal activity. Yet instead of walking back to his cruiser to run the information, Grayson lingered. His gaze shifted between Marcus and the contents of the car. That's when he spotted the briefcase on the passenger seat. To Grayson, it looked suspicious, like it might contain something illicit. "What's in the bag?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "It's just my work materials," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm a lawyer." He offered a small smile, trying to ease the tension. "I've had a long day, so if there's no issue, I'd appreciate being able to continue home." But Grayson wasn't satisfied. Instead of backing off, he grew more agitated. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand now gripping the handle of his gun. Marcus froze, his heart pounding. He knew the risks of disobeying a direct command, but also understood the dangers of escalating the situation further. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of surrender. Witnesses nearby watched the scene unfold with growing concern. A young couple walking their dog paused mid-stride, unsure whether to intervene or keep moving. Across the street, an elderly woman peered out from her living room window, clutching her phone tightly in case she needed to call for help. None of them could hear exactly what was being said, but the body language told its own story. Grayson's posture was rigid and confrontational, while Marcus remained composed despite the mounting tension. As seconds ticked by, the interaction grew increasingly volatile. Grayson continued to bark commands, his frustration evident. Marcus responded with patience, repeating that he had done nothing wrong and asking repeatedly why he had been stopped. Then, without warning, the situation spiraled out of control. Witnesses reported hearing Grayson shout, "Don't move!" followed by the deafening sound of gunfire. Bullets tore through the night air, striking Marcus multiple times. His body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The aftermath was chaos. Neighbors rushed outside, screaming for help. Someone dialed 911, frantically explaining what had happened. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Marcus Thompson, the brilliant lawyer who had devoted his life to fighting injustice, was gone. The witnesses who had seen the exchange recounted what they had observed, their voices trembling with fear and disbelief. They described how Marcus had kept his hands visible, how he had cooperated fully, and how the shooting appeared unprovoked. News of the incident spread rapidly. By morning, headlines blared across every major news outlet. "Prominent lawyer killed during traffic stop." Social media erupted with outrage. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs bearing Marcus's name and demanding accountability. Hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" trended nationwide, drawing attention to yet another case of alleged police brutality. Meanwhile, Grayson sat in silence, grappling with the enormity of what had transpired. At first, he tried to justify his actions, claiming self-defense. According to his initial statement, he believed Marcus posed a threat and feared for his safety. But as details emerged, including dashcam footage showing Marcus complying peacefully, the cracks in Grayson's story began to show. Public pressure mounted, forcing authorities to take action. For the first time in recent memory, charges were filed against a police officer accused of using excessive force. Grayson was arrested and booked on suspicion of murder, his mugshot broadcast across television screens. The nation held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would justice finally prevail, or would this case follow the same pattern as countless others before it? One thing was certain. Marcus Thompson's death had ignited a firestorm, sparking conversations about race, policing, and systemic inequality. Though he was no longer alive to fight for change, his legacy lived on in the voices of those demanding answers and accountability for his senseless killing. The days following Marcus Thompson's death were filled with raw emotion, outrage, and a growing demand for justice. The city of Chicago, and much of the nation, was gripped by grief and anger. Protesters marched through the streets, holding candles and vigils and chanting Marcus's name. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Say his name," amplifying calls for accountability. It was clear that this case wasn't just about one man. It represented years of frustration over police brutality, racial profiling, and systemic injustice. As public pressure mounted, local authorities found themselves under intense scrutiny. For once, there seemed to be undeniable evidence pointing to wrongdoing. Dashcam footage from Officer Daniel Grayson's patrol car captured the entire encounter. In the video, Marcus appeared calm and cooperative throughout the traffic stop. His hands remained visible, and he followed every instruction given by Grayson. Yet within minutes, shots rang out, leaving no doubt that the use of force had been excessive and unwarranted. Witness statements further corroborated what the footage showed. Neighbors who had seen the incident described Marcus as respectful and compliant, while Grayson came across as aggressive and unnecessarily confrontational. One witness, an elderly woman named Margaret Lewis, tearfully recounted how she watched the scene unfold from her window. "He didn't deserve that," she said during an interview. "That poor man did nothing wrong. He was just standing there trying to explain himself, and then it happened so fast." With mounting evidence and public outcry, prosecutors took the rare step of charging Grayson with second-degree murder. This decision sent shockwaves through both the community and law enforcement agencies. Cases involving police officers accused of misconduct often ended in acquittals or dropped charges, but this time felt different. The weight of national attention and the undeniable proof forced officials to act decisively. The trial quickly became a media sensation, drawing reporters, activists, and legal experts from across the country. Courtrooms are typically solemn places, but this one crackled with tension. Every seat was filled, and overflow crowds gathered outside, holding signs and banners bearing Marcus's image. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. On one side sat members of Marcus's family, his parents, siblings, and extended relatives, all wearing black as a symbol of mourning. They clutched photos of Marcus smiling, his bright eyes full of hope, reminding everyone present of the life cut tragically short. Leading the prosecution was a team of seasoned attorneys determined to honor Marcus's memory. Their opening statements painted a vivid picture of a man whose brilliance and compassion made him a beacon of hope for marginalized communities. They argued that Grayson's actions weren't simply reckless, but rooted in prejudice. "This isn't just about one officer making a mistake," lead prosecutor Sarah Bennett declared. "This is about a system that allows racism to fester unchecked." Marcus Thompson was targeted because of who he was, a black man driving a nice car in a neighborhood where some believed he didn't belong. To support their case, the prosecution called upon witnesses who had known Marcus personally. Among them was his younger sister, Elena Thompson. When she took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Dressed in a simple blouse, Elena held herself with quiet strength as she spoke about her brother. She described how Marcus had always been her protector, shielding her from bullies as a child and encouraging her dreams as an adult. "My brother wasn't just a lawyer," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "He was a fighter, for justice, for equality, for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And now we're here because someone decided he didn't deserve to live." Elena's testimony struck a chord with everyone in the room, including jurors. Her words humanized Marcus, turning him from a headline into a person whose loss left a gaping void in the lives of those who loved him. Other witnesses included colleagues, friends, and even former clients who shared stories of Marcus's dedication and kindness. Together, they built a portrait of a man who had dedicated his life to uplifting others. On the defense side, Grayson's lawyers worked tirelessly to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They argued that their client acted in self-defense, claiming that the situation escalated beyond his control. During cross-examinations, they questioned witnesses aggressively, attempting to poke holes in their accounts. At times, their tactics bordered on combative, drawing audible gasps from the gallery. But despite their efforts, the core facts of the case remained unchanged. Marcus had complied fully, and Grayson had fired multiple shots without justification. One of the most pivotal moments came when the dashcam footage was played in court. Jurors leaned forward, watching intently as the events unfolded frame by frame. There was no mistaking what they saw. Marcus standing calmly beside his car, his hands raised slightly as Grayson barked commands. Then suddenly, gunfire erupted. The audio captured the sound of bullets hitting flesh, followed by eerie silence. When the video ended, the courtroom sat frozen, grappling with the gravity of what they had witnessed. Throughout the trial, Grayson himself remained stoic, rarely showing emotion. Occasionally, he glanced toward his family seated behind him, exchanging brief nods of reassurance. His demeanor suggested confidence, but cracks began to show during his own testimony. Under intense questioning from the prosecution, Grayson struggled to justify his actions. Why had he drawn his weapon? What specific threat had Marcus posed? Grayson's answers were inconsistent, sometimes contradictory, undermining his credibility. Closing arguments approached, tensions reached a fever pitch. Both sides delivered impassioned speeches, appealing to the jury's sense of morality and fairness. Prosecutor Sarah Bennett urged them not to let fear or bias cloud their judgment. "This is your chance to send a message," she said, her voice steady but firm. "A message that no one, not even those sworn to protect us, is above the law." Meanwhile, Grayson's defense attorney implored the jury to consider the pressures faced by police officers, framing the shooting as a tragic accident rather than a deliberate act of malice. When the judge finally dismissed the jury to deliberate, the courtroom emptied, leaving only a few scattered reporters and anxious family members waiting outside. Hours turned into days as the jury debated behind closed doors. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, heightening anticipation and anxiety. Would justice prevail? Or would this case follow the same disheartening pattern as so many before it? Finally, after what felt like an endless wait, the verdict arrived. As the foreperson stood to deliver the decision, the room grew deathly quiet. All eyes were fixed on the jury, searching for any hint of what was to come. When the word "guilty" echoed through the chamber, pandemonium broke loose. Cheers erupted from Marcus's supporters, tears streaming down faces as relief washed over them. For the first time in recent history, a police officer had been convicted of murder for killing a civilian. The moment was historic, a small but significant victory in the ongoing fight for justice. Yet even amid celebration, there was acknowledgement that the battle was far from over. While Grayson's conviction marked progress, true reform required addressing deeper issues embedded within policing and society at large. Still, for Marcus's family and countless others watching closely, this verdict offered a glimmer of hope. Justice may have been delayed, but it hadn't been denied. At least not this time. The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of emotions the moment the foreperson uttered the word "guilty." Cheers, tears, and gasps filled the air as Marcus Thompson's family hugged one another tightly. For them, this verdict wasn't just a legal decision. It was validation that their loved one's life mattered. On the other side of the room, Officer Daniel Grayson sat motionless, his face pale and expressionless. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Grayson didn't react. It was as if the weight of the jury's decision had crushed him in an instant. As Judge Angela Hartley called for order, the room slowly quieted down, though the tension remained palpable. Everyone knew what came next. Sentencing. In cases like this, judges often faced immense pressure to balance justice with fairness. But Judge Hartley was known for her no-nonsense approach and deep commitment to upholding the law. She wasted no time addressing the court, her voice steady yet resolute. "This case has shaken not only our city but our entire nation," she began, looking directly at the jurors, lawyers, and families seated before her. "It is a stark reminder of the consequences when power is misused and prejudice goes unchecked. Marcus Thompson was a man who dedicated his life to fighting for others, to ensuring that justice prevailed even in the darkest corners of society. And now we are here because someone decided he did not deserve the same right to live safely and freely." Her words struck a chord, especially among those who had followed the trial closely. Many felt that this was more than just about punishing Grayson. It was about sending a message to law enforcement and society at large. The judge continued, her tone growing firmer. "We cannot ignore the broader implications of this crime. This was not a split-second mistake or an accident. This was a deliberate act of violence fueled by bias, fear, and a failure to de-escalate. Such actions undermine trust in institutions meant to protect us all. When it came time to announce the sentence, the courtroom fell silent once again. Judge Hartley paused briefly, allowing the gravity of the moment to sink in. Then, with unwavering clarity, she delivered her ruling. Daniel Grayson, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The impact of those words rippled through the room. Some people clapped softly while others simply bowed their heads in reflection. Outside the courthouse, news crews scrambled to capture reactions from the crowd gathered there. Protesters held signs bearing Marcus's name, cheering the verdict as a victory for justice. Yet amidst the celebration, there were also somber reminders that this outcome couldn't bring Marcus back. His parents stood outside, holding each other tightly, their faces etched with both relief and sorrow. "This doesn't heal the pain," Marcus's mother said during a brief interview, "but it shows that his death wasn't in vain." Grayson's sentencing became national news almost immediately. Headlines proclaimed it as one of the harshest penalties ever handed down to a police officer in modern history. Legal experts weighed in, calling it a landmark moment in the fight against police brutality. While convictions in such cases were rare, sentences of this magnitude were virtually unheard of. To many, it signaled a turning point, a sign that accountability could finally be achieved even in systems historically resistant to change. But not everyone agreed. Within law enforcement circles, opinions were divided. Some officers expressed concern that the verdict might discourage others from doing their jobs effectively, fearing they could face similar consequences for making split-second decisions under pressure. Others, however, acknowledged that Grayson's actions had crossed a line. A retired detective named Robert Miller told reporters, "There's a difference between enforcing the law and abusing your authority. What happened here? That wasn't policing, that was murder." For Grayson himself, the days following the sentencing were bleak. He was transferred to a maximum security facility where he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Images of him in handcuffs being led away by guards circulated widely online. Some people mocked him, posting memes and harsh comments beneath photos of his arrest. Others argued that while his punishment was deserved, celebrating his incarceration seemed counterproductive. "Hate won't solve anything," wrote one user on social media. "What we need is real reform, not just revenge." In the weeks and months that followed, the fallout from the trial continued to reverberate across the country. Local officials announced plans to implement sweeping reforms within the police department, including mandatory de-escalation training, stricter oversight of officer conduct, and independent investigations into allegations of misconduct. Activists praised these measures as steps in the right direction, but warned that lasting change would require sustained effort. "A single verdict doesn't fix decades of systemic issues," said Tanya Lewis, a community organizer. "We have to keep pushing until every corner of this system reflects fairness and equality." Meanwhile, Grayson's conviction sparked heated debates about race, privilege, and accountability. Talk shows, podcasts, and panel discussions dissected every aspect of the case, from the evidence presented in court to the societal factors that allowed such tragedies to occur. Some argued that Grayson's fate served as a warning to others in positions of authority, while others pointed out that true justice required addressing root causes rather than focusing solely on individual accountability. For Marcus's family, moving forward proved difficult. Though they found solace in knowing that Grayson would never harm anyone again, the void left by Marcus's absence was impossible to fill. Elena, his younger sister, struggled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt proud that her brother's legacy had inspired so many people. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the sense of loss. "I'm glad the world sees how special he was," she said during an emotional speech at a memorial event. "But I'd give anything to have him back. No verdict can replace that." Despite the challenges, the Thompson family resolved to honor Marcus's memory by continuing his work. They established the Marcus Thompson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing scholarships and resources to aspiring lawyers from underserved communities. The foundation quickly gained traction, attracting donations and support from individuals and organizations nationwide. Its mission was simple yet powerful: to empower the next generation of advocates who would carry on Marcus's fight for justice. As time passed, Marcus's story began to take on a life of its own. Schools started teaching his case as part of lessons on civil rights and criminal justice reform. Artists painted murals of him in cities across the country, depicting him as a symbol of resilience and hope. Books and documentaries chronicled his journey, ensuring that future generations would remember his name and contributions. Still, the question lingered: was this enough? Could one verdict undo centuries of injustice? Most people agreed that while Grayson's conviction represented progress, it was only a fraction of what needed to be done. Real change required confronting uncomfortable truths about racism, inequality, and the ways in which power operated in society. As one activist put, justice isn't a destination, it's a journey, and we're still walking. Though the scars left by Marcus's death would never fully heal, his legacy endured. He had become more than just a lawyer, more than a victim of tragedy. He was a catalyst for transformation. Through his sacrifice, countless lives were touched, and conversations about justice and accountability reached new heights. While the road ahead remained long and uncertain, one thing was clear: Marcus Thompson's name would forever be synonymous with courage, compassion, and the unyielding pursuit of a better world. The courtroom was quiet when the judge said the final words of the sentence. A long silence filled the air before people started to react, some crying, others standing and clapping. Outside, thousands had gathered in the streets, waiting for news. When they heard what happened, the crowd erupted in cheers. Marcus D. Johnson had been gone for over a year now, but his name had never left the hearts of those who knew him or had only heard about him through the news. His death had sparked a fire that no one could put out. People all across the country had started talking about fairness, about respect, and about how even the most powerful can make mistakes and must face the consequences. His mother, who had lost her job years ago just to give Marcus a better life, stood at the front of the courtroom with her hands over her heart. She hadn't slept much since the day she found out he was shot. But today something felt different. For the first time in a long time, she smiled. Marcus's story didn't end with the shooting. It began again after that, because when someone is taken too soon, their legacy often grows stronger than it ever could have in life. In the weeks that followed the trial, many new ideas came forward. Some were about changing how police officers are trained, so they learn how to stay calm and talk instead of shoot. Others were about giving more power to the people who review these kinds of cases, making sure that every officer is held to the same high standard. Cities across the country started looking at their own laws and asking hard questions. Are we doing enough? They asked. Can we do better? One of the biggest changes came from the city where Marcus lived. They passed a law that required all police officers to wear body cameras, not just for special cases, but always. This way, if anything happened, there would be proof of what really took place. They also created a new group of people who would review every use of force by police. These reviewers would come from different parts of the community, not just from inside the police department. That way, decisions would be fairer, and people would feel more confident that justice was being done. But perhaps the most important thing Marcus left behind wasn't just the legal changes. It was the idea that one person, especially one who believed in doing the right thing, could inspire a whole generation. At Harvard Law School, where Marcus had once studied, they created a scholarship in his name. It was for students from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to become lawyers. The goal was simple: to help more young people like Marcus get the chance to fight for justice, just as he did. And then there was the institute. The Marcus D. Johnson Institute for Racial Justice. It was built near the old courthouse where Marcus used to work. Inside its walls, young lawyers trained to defend people who might otherwise go unheard. They learned how to speak up for the poor, the sick, the scared, the ones who needed someone to stand beside them. Teachers at the institute often told their students about Marcus. How he had grown up in a small apartment with his mother, how he had walked miles to school each day, how he had never let anyone tell him he couldn't dream big, and how he had spent his life trying to make sure that everyone else had the same chances he did. People still talk about Marcus. Not just in courtrooms, but in classrooms, in homes, in meetings. He became a symbol of hope. A reminder that no matter how dark things can get, there are always people willing to fight for what's right. Even the officer who shot him, Officer Carl Whitmore, ended up changing in unexpected ways. While in prison, he wrote letters to Marcus's family saying he was sorry. Whether they were real or not, it showed that even the hardest hearts can be moved. As for Marcus's mother, she became a speaker at events all over the country. She talked about strength, about love, about how even in the worst times good can still come out of bad. She would say, "My son was taken from me too soon, but I don't want his death to be the end of the story. I want it to be the beginning of something bigger." And that's exactly what happened. His story became part of history, not just as a tragedy, but as a turning point. Because sometimes it takes one voice to start a movement. Sometimes it takes one life to remind us all of the value of another. And sometimes it takes a single moment of injustice to create a wave of change that ripples far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Marcus D. Johnson may not have lived to see it all. But his name lives on. In schools, in laws, in the hearts of those who believe that justice is worth fighting for. And as long as there are people who remember him, there will always be hope.